An elderly woman's hands are fractured just days before she's set to live out her dream of playing piano in public. Her daughter-in-law claims it was an accident, but the medical exams tell a different story. Her son discovers something horrific and cruel. With her hands scarred, the mother decides to face the pain and play not with technique, but with soul. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's get started. The morning arrived with a special glow over the city of Boston. The spring sun streamed through the windows of the spacious house in the Beacon Hill neighborhood, illuminating the grand piano that occupied the most noble corner of the living room. Helen woke up early, as she always did at 72, but on this day, her heart beat with a different energy. Her fingers tingled with anticipation, and she smiled, remembering that in just 3 weeks, she would have the performance that would change her life. She got out of bed slowly, feeling the weight of the years in her joints, but also the lightness of someone who was finally realizing a dream she had held since her youth. She put on the blue silk robe her son Edward had given her for her last birthday and carefully descended the stairs, holding onto the railing. The house was silent. Edward and his wife Megan were still asleep, as was her granddaughter Isabella, who at 17 was spending her school break there. Helen prepared her breakfast calmly. A warm baguette the housekeeper had left in the basket, high-quality butter, homemade strawberry jam, and a strong, freshly brewed coffee. She sat at the kitchen table and let her thoughts drift to the past. How many times, throughout her life, had she dreamed of this moment? How many nights had she fallen asleep, imagining herself on a stage, playing for an attentive audience, her fingers gliding over the keys with the mastery she had so longed to develop? Born into a family of merchants in the 50s, Helen had grown up listening to classical music on the radio. Her father, who owned a fabric shop downtown, loved Chopin and Beethoven and always said that music was the language of the soul. Helen had fallen in love with the piano at age 8 when she saw a performance. At a local church, a young woman dressed in white played with such delicacy that she seemed to float over the instrument. In that instant, Helen knew what she wanted for her life. But reality was different. The family had limited resources, and a piano was a luxury item. Music lessons were far too expensive for their tight budget. Helen grew up cherishing the dream in silence while helping her father at the store and later working as an elementary school teacher. She married Robert, a serious and hard-working engineer, at 23, and soon Edward was born. Life filled up, with responsibilities, bills to pay, diapers to change, homework to review. The piano was put off, always for later. Robert had passed away 10 years ago from heart complications. Edward, by then a successful lawyer, had insisted that his mother move in with them. Helen accepted, but on one condition: she wanted a piano. Edward not only agreed, but bought the best instrument he could find, a magnificent Steinway that took the place of honor in the living room. For the first few years, Helen just looked at the piano with almost religious respect. She played a few notes here and there, but didn't have the courage to really start. She felt too old, too incapable, too far behind. Until 3 years ago, at a craft fair at Faneuil Hall Marketplace, she met Claire, a retired piano teacher who offered lessons for adults. Claire was a vibrant 65-year-old woman with short grey hair, piercing blue eyes, and a contagious smile. She herself had started teaching adults after realizing how many people carried the same unfulfilled dream. The lessons were twice a week, and Helen dedicated herself with a passion that surprised even the teacher. Her fingers, stiff at first, gradually gained flexibility. Her posture improved. Reading sheet music, which had seemed impossible at the beginning, became almost natural. And then came the invitation. Claire organized an annual recital for her adult students at Jordan Hall, a prestigious event that drew entire families and classical music lovers. Helen would be one of the performers. She would play Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece she had chosen for its melancholic beauty and the emotional connection she felt with every note. Finishing her coffee, Helen went to the living room. She sat at the piano, adjusted her posture as Claire had taught her, and began to play. The first notes flowed smoothly, delicately, Her fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence. She closed her eyes and let the music carry her away, feeling each chord resonate, not just in the instrument, but in her own chest. She didn't notice that Megan had come down the stairs and was watching her from the living room doorway. Her daughter-in-law was 38, with brown hair always impeccably styled, weekly manicures, and designer clothes. She had married Edward 15 years ago and had always maintained a polite but distant relationship with her mother-in-law. Megan came from a traditional New York City family, had moved to Boston after the wedding, and never hid that she considered the Massachusetts capital less sophisticated than her hometown. Megan crossed her arms and watched Helen play. There was something about that scene that bothered her deeply. In recent months since the performance was announced, Helen had received growing attention. Edward spoke of his mother with visible pride. Family friends praised the elderly woman's courage and dedication. At the last family gathering, Helen had been the center of attention, with everyone wanting to know about her lessons, her preparation, her musical choice. And Megan couldn't help but compare that attention with the indifference Isabella received. Her daughter had been studying piano for 7 years, since she was 10. Megan had invested a fortune in private lessons, quality instruments, and imported materials. But Isabella had never shown true talent or passion. She played mechanically without soul, fulfilling an obligation imposed by her mother. And the more Helen progressed and received praise, the more Megan felt a pang of something she didn't want to name: envy. It was envy, she had to admit to herself. How was it possible that a 72-year-old woman who had started from scratch just 3 years ago received more recognition than her daughter, who had been studying for so long? Why were people so enchanted with Helen's story and barely mentioned Isabella? Megan turned and went back upstairs without making a sound. She entered the bedroom and found Edward getting dressed for work. He was a 45-year-old man, tall, his hair starting to grey at the temples, with kind brown eyes like his mother's. He loved Helen with the devotion of an only child and was ecstatic about the upcoming performance. "Morning, honey," Edward said, seeing his wife. "Is Mom already at the piano? I could hear the music from up here. She's getting better and better, don't you think?" Megan forced a smile. "She is. Very dedicated." Edward noticed something in his wife's tone, but chose not to comment. Lately, he felt that Megan had been acting strange, more irritable, more withdrawn. He attributed it to the stress of her job managing a boutique on Newbury Street, but there was something else he couldn't quite identify. "I'm heading to work. I have an important hearing today," Edward said, kissing his wife's forehead. "I won't be home for lunch. He'll probably be late." Megan nodded and waited for her husband to leave. Then she sat on the bed and let her thoughts run wild. She had to do something. She couldn't just watch as Helen received all that admiration. It wasn't fair. Isabella deserved to be recognized. She, Megan, deserved to be seen as the mother who had invested years in her daughter's musical education. An idea began to form in her mind. It was wrong, she knew, but the feeling of injustice was too strong to be ignored. That afternoon, Helen had her regular lesson with Claire. The teacher lived in a charming brownstone in Brookline, with a Yamaha piano in a living room filled with plants and natural light. The lessons there were always a time of peace and growth for Helen. "You're progressing wonderfully," Claire said after hearing Helen play the entire piece. "Your interpretation is gaining emotional depth. It's not just technique, Helen. You're putting your soul into this music." Helen felt her eyes well up. "Thank you, Claire. You have no idea how much this means to me. I've waited my whole life for this moment." Claire held Helen's hands warmly. "And you deserve every second of it. Your performance is going to move a lot of people, I'm sure of it." The two talked for another hour about performance details, how to handle stage fright, and the importance of breathing and connecting with the music. When Helen left, she felt renewed, full of confidence. But when she got home, she found a different atmosphere. Megan was in the living room, organizing some papers on the coffee table. Isabella was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a bored expression. And Edward hadn't returned from the office yet. "Helen, can I talk to you for a moment?" Megan asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, dear. What is it?" Megan gestured to the couch. "Please sit. It's about the performance. Helen felt a knot in her stomach, but sat down next to her granddaughter. What about the performance? Well, Megan said, choosing her words carefully, I've been thinking a lot about it, and I think it would be wonderful if Isabella could participate too. After all, she's been studying piano for much longer than you, and it would be an opportunity for her to show her talent. Helen blinked, surprised. But Megan, the recital is specifically for Claire's students. Isabella isn't her student. I know, but I thought maybe you could talk to your teacher. Ask for an exception. Isabella could play right before or after you. It would be beautiful, the grandmother and granddaughter on the same stage. Helen looked at Isabella, who kept her eyes glued to her phone, clearly uninterested in the conversation. Honey, would you like to play in the recital? Isabella shrugged without looking up. Whatever. Megan shot an irritated look at her daughter. Isabella, be polite. Your grandmother is asking you something important. Isabella sighed and finally put down her phone. Mom, you know I don't like performing. I get nervous, I mess up the notes. And honestly, I don't see why I have to play at Grandma's event. Megan felt her face flush with anger, but controlled herself. Because it would be an incredible opportunity for you. Because you've studied for years and deserve recognition. Because it would be good for you. Helen felt the discomfort grow. Megan, dear, I understand your intention, but I think this is something for Isabella to decide. And besides, the recital is already fully organized. It wouldn't be appropriate to ask for last-minute changes. Megan bit her lip. Her eyes shone with an emotion Helen couldn't identify. I see. So you won't even try to help your own granddaughter. That's not it, Megan. I would love to see Isabella play. Just not at this specific recital. Maybe at another event in the future. Of course, in the future. Always in the future, Megan muttered, standing up abruptly. Never mind, Helen. I got the message. And she left the room before Helen could respond. Isabella rolled her eyes. Sorry, Grandma, Mom's been kind of weird lately. I think she's stressed about the store. Helen stroked her granddaughter's hair. Don't worry, sweetie, it'll pass. But deep in her heart, Helen felt a growing unease. There was something in Megan's eyes that disturbed her. Something that went beyond stress or maternal concern. It was something deeper, darker. That night at dinner, Edward tried to keep the conversation light, but the tension was palpable. Megan barely touched her food, responding in monosyllables when spoken to. Helen did her best to seem natural, but she felt a weight in her stomach. After dinner, Helen went up to her room and called her best friend, Teresa, with whom she'd been friends since grade school. The two talked almost every day, sharing joys and worries. Terry, I think something's wrong with Megan, Helen said into the phone, lying on her bed. She's different. She wanted me to ask for Isabella to play in my recital, and when I said it wasn't possible, she got really upset. Teresa, a 70-year-old widow and mother of 3, knew family drama well. Oh, Helen, mother-in-law jealousy is a classic. Maybe she feels like you're getting more attention than her daughter. But that doesn't make any sense. I never wanted to overshadow anyone. I just want to live my dream. I know, dear, but people aren't always rational when it comes to family. Keep an eye on it, but don't let it mess with your preparation. You deserve this moment. Helen thanked her for the conversation and hung up, but the discomfort remained. She slept poorly that night, waking up several times from confusing dreams. The following days brought a strange routine. Megan avoided Helen, leaving rooms when her mother-in-law entered, answering only what was necessary when asked. Edward noticed the tension but didn't know how to intervene. Isabella remained in her teenage world, oblivious to the adult drama. Helen continued her daily practice, but the joy was tainted by the heavy atmosphere in the house. She felt watched, judged. More than once, while playing the piano, she noticed Megan standing in the doorway, observing her with an indecipherable expression. A week before the performance, Helen woke up with a nagging pain in her hands. She thought it was just tension from over-practicing and took an anti-inflammatory. But the pain persisted throughout the day. Her joints felt stiffer, her fingers less responsive. She tried to play in the afternoon and noticed her performance was compromised. The notes didn't flow as they had before. Worried, she called Claire. The teacher suggested she rest for 2 days, avoiding the piano to not strain her hands. Helen agreed, but her anxiety grew. What if the pain didn't go away? What if she couldn't perform? That night at dinner, Helen casually mentioned the pain in her hands. Edward was immediately concerned. "Mom, you should see a doctor. It's not normal to feel pain like that." "I already made an appointment with an orthopedist for tomorrow," Helen said. "It's probably just overuse. They'll rest for a few days and it'll be fine." Megan looked up from her plate. What a shame, right now, so close to the performance. There was something in Megan's tone that sent a shiver down Helen's spine, but she pushed the feeling away, attributing it to her own paranoia. The next day, Helen went to the doctor. The orthopedist examined her hands carefully, ordered x-rays, and was puzzled by what he saw. "Mrs. Miller, your joints are inflamed, but I don't see any signs of arthritis or another chronic condition. It's an acute inflammation, possibly caused by excessive, repetitive motion or some minor trauma you didn't notice." "Trauma?" Helen asked. "But I haven't injured myself." "Sometimes it happens without us realizing it. A light bump, some pressure, something like that. I'm going to prescribe stronger anti-inflammatories and absolute rest for 5 days. No piano during that time." Helen's heart sank. "But doctor, I have an important performance in 6 days." The doctor sighed. "Look, if you rest properly and take the medication, there's a chance you'll be better in time. But if you push it now, you could make it much worse and compromise not only the performance, but your long-term health." Helen returned home disheartened. Edward tried to console her, but she could barely speak. She went up to her room and cried alone, feeling her dream slipping through her fingers. Literally. It was Isabella who knocked on her door hours later. "Grandma, can I come in?" "Of course, sweetie." Isabella sat on the bed next to her grandmother. "I heard Dad talking about your hands. I'm so sorry." Helen smiled weakly. "Thank you, my dear. I'll be okay." Isabella hesitated as if she wanted to say something more. Finally, she spoke. "Grandma, I need to tell you something. But you can't tell anyone I'm the one who told you, okay?" Helen sat up straighter, alert. "What is it, Isabella?" "It's about my mom. She's been acting really weird. Last week I heard her on the phone with someone talking about you. She was saying you were getting too much attention, that it wasn't fair to me, that you were overshadowing her work as a mother. I was so embarrassed, Grandma. I never asked for any of this." A chill ran down Helen's spine. "And what else did she say?" "I didn't hear everything, but she mentioned doing something to balance things out. I don't know what that means, but I got worried. Mom's been obsessed with this whole thing about me having to be better than you at the piano, and honestly, I can't take it anymore." Helen hugged her granddaughter. "Don't you worry, dear. This is grown-up stuff. Your mother is just worried about you." But inside, Helen felt a deep unease growing. Could Megan be capable of doing something to sabotage her performance? No, that was an absurd thought. Megan was her daughter-in-law, the mother of her granddaughter, her son's wife. She wouldn't do something like that. Or would she? The next few days were a mix of forced rest and mounting anxiety. Helen took her medication religiously, applied cold compresses to her hands, and avoided any movement that could worsen the inflammation. But time was running out and the performance was approaching inexorably. 3 days before the recital, Helen woke up feeling her hands were a little better. The pain had subsided, and so had the stiffness. Carefully, she went down to the living room and sat at the piano. She played a few simple scales. Her fingers responded better, though they still weren't perfect. She was so focused that she didn't notice Megan standing in the doorway, watching her with a dark expression. When Helen finally saw her daughter-in-law, a shiver ran down her spine. "Your hands are getting better," Megan said with a cold smile. "That's good." Helen forced a smile. "They are. I think I'll be able to play in the recital." Megan nodded slowly. "I hope so. It would be a shame to waste all that preparation time." And she turned away, leaving Helen alone with a premonition she couldn't name. Something was wrong, very wrong. But what, exactly, Helen couldn't say. 2 days before the performance, Helen woke up in the middle of the night with a terrible thirst. She went down to the kitchen for a glass of water, and passing through the living room, noticed a light on in Edward's office. She found it strange, as it was almost 3 in the morning. She approached silently and heard voices. It was Edward and Megan, arguing in low but tense tones. "Megan, this is ridiculous. My mother isn't trying to overshadow anyone," Edward was saying. "You don't get it. You never get it. Everyone's talking about her, praising her, like she's some kind of hero. And what about Isabella? No one cares about the effort she makes, about the years of study I invested in her. Isabella doesn't like playing the piano, Megan. That's obvious to everyone but you. You're projecting your own desires onto our daughter." "No, I'm not. I just want her to be recognized. And making my mother feel bad is going to solve that. I'm not doing anything. I don't know what you're talking about." Helen felt her legs tremble. She backed away silently and returned to her room, her heart racing. The confirmation of her suspicions brought no relief, only more fear. Megan truly harbored negative feelings about her performance, but how dangerous was that? The next morning, just 1 day before the recital, Helen woke up with a horrible feeling. Her hands were swollen again, the joints painful and stiff. It was as if the improvement of the last few days had vanished overnight. She tried to move her fingers and felt a sharp pain shoot through her wrists. Desperate, she called for Edward. He took her to the emergency room immediately. The doctors ran new tests and were confused. "Mrs. Miller, the inflammation has gotten significantly worse. This is very strange. Did you do anything different? Did you have an accident?" "No, nothing. I was getting better. I don't understand what happened." The doctors prescribed stronger medication and immobilized her hands with light splints. The chances of her being able to play the next day were practically zero. Helen cried on the way home. Edward held her good hand, trying to comfort her. "Mum, we can reschedule. Claire will understand." "It's not the same, Edward. I've waited my whole life for this." When they arrived home, they found Megan in the kitchen preparing lunch. She looked at Helen's bandaged hands, and her face showed no genuine surprise. There was something rehearsed in her expression of concern. "My God, Helen! What happened?" Helen stared into her eyes, and in that moment she knew. She knew with absolute certainty that Megan had something to do with the worsening of her hands. But how? How could she have done it? The next few hours dragged on in a silent nightmare. Helen stayed in her room, unable to accept that her dream was destroyed. Edward cancelled the performance with Claire, who was devastated by the news. And then, as night fell and the house sank into a heavy silence, Isabella knocked on Helen's door again. "Grandma, I saw something. I have to tell you." Isabella entered the room with wide eyes, carefully closing the door behind her. Helen sat up in bed, her still painful hands throbbing inside the splints. Her heart quickened at her granddaughter's serious expression. "What did you see, dear?" Helen asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Isabella came closer and sat at the foot of the bed, her hands trembling slightly. "Grandma, you have to promise me you won't. Say I'm the one who told you. At least not right now. I still live here and I'm scared of what Mom might do." Helen reached out her good hand and held Isabella's. "I promise. You can tell me." Isabella took a deep breath. "2 nights ago, when you were asleep, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. When I was coming back to my room, I saw Mom leaving your room. I thought it was weird because she never goes in there in the middle of the night. She didn't see me. I hid in the hallway and watched her go down to the kitchen, wash her hands very slowly, like she was getting something off them, and then go back to her room." Helen's stomach churned. "And do you know what she was doing in my room?" "I wasn't sure. So the next day, when everyone was out of the house, I went to investigate." Isabella hesitated, biting her lip. "Grandma, I found some pills hidden in Mom's dresser drawer. They're not her usual meds. I looked up the name on the package online. They're pills that cause allergic reactions and inflammation, the kind of thing that could make someone's hands swell up." The world seemed to spin around Helen. "Are you saying your mother put something in my medicine?" Isabella nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I think so, Grandma. I checked your vitamins, the ones you take every night before bed. The pills look weird. Some of them look a little different from the others, like they've been replaced. And Mom's bottle was open, with some pills missing." Helen closed her eyes, feeling a mix of shock, betrayal, and a profound sadness. How could someone in her own family do something like this? Megan had tampered with her vitamins to sabotage her performance, to make her suffer, to destroy her dream. "Honey," Helen said in a trembling voice, "you need to show me those pills, and we need to tell your father." Isabella shook her head quickly. "Not now, Grandma. Not yet. Dad won't believe it. He never believes it when someone says something bad about Mum. He always defends her. And if I tell him, Mum will deny everything, say I'm making it up, and things will get worse for me. I'm only 17. I have nowhere else to go." Helen understood her granddaughter's dilemma. Isabella was right. Edward was blind when it came to Megan. He always had been. He loved her with devotion and refused to see her flaws. And accusing Megan without concrete proof could destroy the family in an irreparable way. "So what do we do?" Helen asked, feeling lost. Isabella wiped her tears. "First, you stop taking the vitamins. Immediately. Then we need to gather proof. Pictures of the pills. Maybe get a sample for testing. And then, when we have everything lined up, we tell Dad, then he won't be able to deny it." Helen nodded slowly. "You are very brave, Isabella, and very smart." Isabella hugged her grandmother carefully, avoiding her injured hands. "I love you, Grandma, and I hate seeing you suffer like this. Mom is wrong, so wrong." That night, Helen didn't take her vitamins. She put the bottle in her nightstand drawer and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind spun in circles, processing Isabella's revelation, trying to understand how it had come to this. Megan, the woman Edward loved, the mother of her dear granddaughter, was intentionally destroying her hands out of envy and resentment. It was so cruel, so absurd, that Helen still struggled to fully accept it. But the evidence was there. The inexplicable worsening of her hands. Megan's lack of genuine surprise at seeing her bandaged. And now, Isabella's discovery. In the following days, Helen feigned normalcy. She continued to put away the vitamins without taking them and noticed a gradual improvement in her hands. The inflammation began to subside, the pain eased, and mobility slowly returned. It was a painful confirmation. Megan really had been poisoning her. Isabella, with the cunning of her generation, photographed the suspicious pills from Megan's bottle with her phone. She even managed to take a few of them and put them in a small plastic bag, hiding them at the bottom of her school backpack. The two women, grandmother and granddaughter, became secret allies in a silent investigation. Edward remained oblivious to it all. He worked long hours at his firm, came home tired, had dinner with the family, and went to bed. On weekends, he tried to cheer Helen up, taking her out to lunch, talking about the possibility of rescheduling the performance in a few months. Helen would smile and agree, but inside she was planning her next steps. Claire, the piano teacher, visited Helen a week after the performance was cancelled. The two hugged for a long time, and Claire didn't hide her sadness. "Helen, dear, I was heartbroken when Edward called me, but your health is what's important. We'll reschedule for the next recital in 3 months. You'll have time to recover completely." Helen thanked her but didn't mention her suspicions about Megan. It wasn't time yet. She needed more proof, a solid plan. It was Teresa, her friend of decades, who finally helped her organize her thoughts. Helen visited her on a sunny afternoon, bringing the photos Isabella had taken. The two sat in Teresa's garden, sipping iced lemon tea. "My God, Helen, this is very serious," Teresa said, after hearing the whole story. "You have to tell Edward, and maybe even the police." "I know, Terry, but Edward won't believe it without concrete proof, and I don't want to destroy his marriage. Despite everything, Megan is Isabella's mother, his wife. This will devastate the whole family." Teresa held Helen's hands firmly. "Dear, she tried to destroy you. She poisoned you out of envy. This isn't something small, it's very serious. You can't let it go." "I won't," Helen promised, "but I need to do this the right way, for everyone's sake." The following weeks brought a strange routine. Helen continued her rehabilitation, her hands improving day by day, now that she was no longer being poisoned. She resumed her lessons with Claire, playing carefully, rebuilding her confidence. The recital had been rescheduled for 2 months later, and she was determined to be ready. Megan, noticing Helen's improvement, was visibly displeased. More than once, Helen caught her looking at her hands with a poorly disguised expression of frustration. But Megan didn't. No, her plan had been discovered. She continued her routine as usual, working at the boutique, taking care of the house, interacting with the family. It was during a Sunday lunch with the whole family gathered that the first crack appeared. Edward casually commented on Helen's improvement, praising her dedication to physical therapy. "Your mum is amazing, isn't she, Megan? In just a few weeks she's already regained almost all her mobility." The doctors were impressed. Megan forced a smile. "Really, very impressive." Isabella, sitting next to her grandmother, exchanged a meaningful look with Helen. The tension was palpable, at least for those who knew what was going on beneath the surface. After lunch, while Helen was helping clear the plates, Megan approached her in the kitchen. The two were alone for a moment. "Are your vitamins working well?" Megan asked, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Helen felt a chill run down her spine but maintained her composure. "Actually, I stopped taking them. I thought they might be making me sick." Megan's smile faltered. "You stopped? Why?" "Just a hunch. And it seems I was right, since I've gotten so much better since I stopped." Megan turned, pale for a second but recovered quickly. "Well, the important thing is that you're better." Helen held her daughter-in-law's gaze. "Yes, Megan. The important thing is that I'm better, despite everything." The subtext of the sentence was not lost. Megan opened her mouth as if to say something, but Edward entered the kitchen at that moment, breaking the tension. "Mom, Megan, do you need any help?" The two answered no simultaneously, and the moment passed. But something had changed. Megan knew that Helen suspected, and Helen knew that Megan knew. That night, Helen and Isabella talked for a long time. "We need to act soon," Helen said. "She knows I found out. I don't know what she might do now." Isabella agreed. "Grandma, I think we should tell Dad tomorrow. Gather all the evidence and tell him. We can't wait any longer." Helen nodded, her heart heavy. "You're right. It's time to reveal the truth." But fate had other plans. The next morning, when Helen came down for breakfast, she found Edward sitting at the kitchen table with a devastated expression. Megan was beside him, crying her eyes out. "What happened?" Helen asked, alarmed. Edward looked up, his eyes red. "Mom, sit down. I need to tell you something." Helen sat, her heart pounding. Edward held her hands carefully, avoiding the still sensitive areas. "Megan told me something very difficult last night. She's going through a serious emotional crisis. She's been dealing with depression and anxiety for months but didn't want to worry anyone. And last night, in a moment of weakness, she tried to do something terrible." Helen's blood ran cold. "What?" "She tried to hurt herself, Mom. She was so desperate with her own feelings of inadequacy that she almost took too many pills. I managed to stop her in time, but she's in a very bad place. We're getting her psychiatric treatment. She needs professional help." Helen looked at Megan, who was hiding her face in her hands, sobbing, and she realized what was happening. Megan was getting ahead of the story. She was creating a narrative where she was the victim, the fragile person who needed compassion. If Helen accused her now, she would seem cruel, insensitive. It was brilliant, in a perverse way. Megan was ensuring that any accusation against her would be interpreted as an attack on a mentally fragile person. "Edward," Helen said carefully, "I understand that Megan is going through a difficult time, but there are some things I need to tell you about what happened to me." Edward shook his head. "Mum, please, not now. Megan is very fragile. She's starting treatment today. The psychiatrist is already on his way. Can we talk about anything else later when she's more stable?" Helen looked at her son, at her crying daughter-in-law, and knew she had lost this battle. If she pushed now, she would be seen as heartless. Edward wouldn't listen to her. She needed another time, another approach. "All right, Edward. We can talk later." Isabella, who had come down the stairs and witnessed the scene from the hallway, found her grandmother in her room an hour later. The girl was furious. "She manipulated everything, Grandma. She played the victim so no one would believe us." Helen hugged her granddaughter. "I know, dear, But we haven't lost yet, we just need to be smarter. In the following weeks, the house turned into a bizarre stage. Megan began intensive psychiatric treatment with therapy sessions 3 times a week and a worrying amount of medication. She moved through the house like a shadow, speaking little, crying frequently, maintaining her role as a broken person in need of care. Edward was devastated by his wife's situation and dedicated himself to supporting her completely. Helen and Isabella, meanwhile, kept their evidence hidden, waiting for the right moment to act. It was Teresa who suggested the solution. "Helen, you need a lawyer, not to sue yet, but for guidance. Someone who understands cases like this and can tell you exactly what to do." Helen followed the advice and discreetly sought out a lawyer specializing in family law and criminal cases. Mr. David Chen was a 50-year-old man, experienced and compassionate. He listened to the entire story, examined the evidence, and gave a sober analysis. "Mrs. Miller, what you have is strong circumstantial evidence, but not conclusive proof. The photos of the pills don't prove they were used against you. We need something more definitive. My suggestion is that we collect a sample of your original vitamins and have a lab analysis done. If we find foreign substances, we'll have irrefutable proof." Helen agreed immediately. She still had the bottle of vitamins she had stopped taking. The lawyer sent the capsules to a specialized lab, and they waited for the results. Meanwhile, Helen continued her preparation for the rescheduled recital. Her hands were almost completely recovered, and she played with a renewed emotional intensity. Each note was an affirmation of resistance, a refusal to be destroyed. Claire noticed the change. "Helen, your music is different, deeper, more intense. What happened?" Helen smiled sadly. "Life happened, Claire, and it taught me that we're stronger than we think." 3 weeks before the recital, the lab results came in. Mr. Chen called Helen, his voice grave on the phone. "Mrs. Miller, the results are conclusive. Your vitamins contained allergenic and anti-inflammatory substances in doses that would cause the exact symptoms you presented. This is deliberate poisoning. We have enough evidence for a criminal complaint." Helen felt her legs tremble. "It's time, then." "It's time," the lawyer confirmed. "I'll prepare all the documentation. You need to decide. Do you want to file a formal police report, or would you prefer to confront your family first?" Helen thought of Edward, of how shattered he would be. She thought of Isabella, who still lived in that house and depended on her parents. She thought of Megan, who had manipulated everything so skillfully. "I want to confront my family first. Edward deserves to know the truth before this becomes a police matter, but I want you present, Mr. Chen, to ensure everything is done correctly." The lawyer agreed, and they scheduled a meeting for the end of that week. Helen informed Edward that she needed to talk about something very important and asked that the whole family be present. Edward, still focused on Megan's treatment, reluctantly agreed. When the day came, Helen sat in the living room with Mr. Chen by her side. Edward and Megan were on the couch across from them. Isabella stood next to her grandmother in a silent show of support. Edward looked at everyone in confusion. "Mum, what is this? Why did you call a lawyer?" Helen took a deep breath and began. "Edward, what I'm about to tell you will be very hard to hear, but you need to know the truth about what really happened to my hands." And then, in a firm but emotional voice, Helen recounted everything. The inexplicable worsening of her hands, Isabella's discovery of the pills in Megan's drawer, the lab analysis proving the poisoning, the photographs, the statements, all the evidence accumulated over the weeks. Edward turned pale, looking from his mother to his wife in disbelief. "This can't be true. Megan, tell me this isn't true." Megan was motionless, her face expressionless. For long seconds she said nothing. Then, slowly, something in her eyes changed. The mask of fragility fell away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "And what if it is true?" Megan said in a voice Helen had never heard before. "What if I really did it? What are you going to do, Edward?" Edward shot up from the couch, trembling. "How can you ask that? How can you admit to something so monstrous and act like it's nothing?" Megan stood up too, her body tense. "Because I was sick of it. Sick of seeing your mother get all the attention. Sick of hearing praise for her while my daughter was ignored. Sick of being the invisible daughter-in-law while the perfect mother-in-law shined. The silence that followed was absolute. Isabella began to cry silently. Mr. Chen was taking notes. Edward seemed to have lost the ability to speak. Helen, with tears streaming down her face, said softly, "Megan, I never wanted to overshadow anyone. I just wanted to live my dream." Megan laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Your dream, always your dream. What about other people's dreams? What about what I wanted for my daughter? Nobody cares about that." Edward finally found his voice. "You poisoned my mother. You could have killed her. And you're talking as if she's the one to blame." Megan turned to her husband. "I wasn't going to kill her. I just wanted her to not be able to play. I just wanted to ruin that ridiculous performance. That's what she deserved." Edward recoiled as if he'd been slapped. "I don't know you. I thought I did, but I don't." Mr. Chen finally intervened. "Mrs. Miller, you have just confessed to a serious crime. Felony poisoning. You have the right to an attorney before continuing this conversation." Megan looked at the lawyer with contempt. "I don't need a lawyer. Everyone here knows what I did, and they know why. I don't regret it." Isabella sobbed louder. "Mum, please, stop." But Megan was beyond the point of no return. Years of resentment, envy, and frustration poured out in an uncontrollable torrent. She was not the fragile victim she had portrayed. She was someone consumed by toxic emotions that had finally overflowed into destructive actions. Edward picked up his phone with trembling hands. "I'm calling the police." Megan didn't try to stop him. She just sat back down on the couch, her eyes empty, and waited for what would come next. The police arrived in less than 30 minutes. 2 officers entered the Miller family home in Beacon Hill and found a scene they would never forget. A shattered family, torn apart by the confession of a crime that seemed straight out of a soap opera, but was terrifyingly real. Megan was taken to the precinct for questioning. She didn't resist, didn't protest. She got into the squad car with the same vacant expression she had maintained since her confession. Edward accompanied her, still in a state of shock, unable to fully process what was happening. Helen stayed home with Isabella and Mr. Chen, all of them trying to comprehend how they had reached this point. The night was long and torturous. Helen couldn't sleep. She sat in her favorite armchair, looking at the piano that represented so much in her life. That magnificent instrument, which should have been a symbol of joy and fulfillment, had become the epicenter of a family tragedy. Was it worth it? Did her dream justify all this pain? Isabella entered the living room at 2 in the morning and found her grandmother still awake. "Grandma, you can't blame yourself for this." Helen looked at her granddaughter with tired eyes. "How can I not, dear? If I hadn't started playing the piano, none of this would have happened." Isabella sat at the foot of the armchair. "That's not true. The problem wasn't the piano. The problem was what was inside my mother. The envy, the resentment, the need to control everything. That was always there. The piano was just the trigger. If it hadn't been this, it would have been something else." Helen stroked her granddaughter's hair. "You're very wise for your age." "I had to grow up fast," Isabella said sadly. "My mom was always difficult. I just never imagined she could do something like this." The two sat in silence for a long moment, finding comfort in each other's presence. They were survivors of a storm that had not yet completely passed. Edward returned home at dawn, his face marked by exhaustion and emotional pain. Megan had been formally charged with felony poisoning and was being held pending a custody hearing. Her lawyer, a professional hired in a hurry by Megan's family, was trying to argue for bail based on her psychiatric treatment, but the DA's office was opposing it. Edward sat at the breakfast table, unable to eat. Helen made strong coffee and sat beside her son, holding his hand. "Son, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen." Edward shook his head. "Mom, you have nothing to apologize for. It was Megan who did all this. I can't believe it. 15 years of marriage. How did I not see it? How did I not realize what she was capable of?" "Because she hid it well," said Isabella, who was also at the table. "And because you didn't want to see, Dad. You always defended Mom, even when she did things that were wrong." Edward looked at his daughter in surprise. "What wrong things?" Isabella sighed. Dad, Mum was always controlling with me. She always forced me to do things I didn't want to. The piano, dance, the beauty pageants when I was little. It was all about her, about what she wanted to project to the world. I never had a voice. And when I tried to speak up, you'd say it was normal, that she just wanted what was best for me. Edward closed his eyes, the pain visible in every line on his face. I failed you. I failed both of you. Helen squeezed her son's hand. It's not about failing, Edward. It's about waking up. And you've woken up. That's what matters now. The following days were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. The custody hearing took place, and the judge, after reviewing the evidence and hearing arguments from both sides, decided to hold Megan without bail. The severity of the crime, the explicit confession, and the risk that she might harm witnesses weighed heavily in the decision. The news spread through the city. The story of the elderly woman poisoned by her daughter-in-law so she couldn't play the piano became a headline in the local papers. Reporters tried to contact Helen for interviews, but she refused them all. She didn't want to turn her suffering into a public spectacle. Claire visited Helen a week after Megan's arrest. The teacher was devastated by the news. Helen, dear, I don't even know what to say. This is so terrible, so shocking. Helen served tea for them both in her living room. It is, Claire, I've discovered that sometimes reality is more dramatic than any fiction. And the recital? Claire asked gently. Do you still want to participate? No one will judge you if you want to back out. Helen looked at the piano, thinking. It was an internal struggle that lasted for days. Part of her wanted to give it all up, forget the piano, leave this painful chapter behind. But another part, deeper and more resilient, refused to give up. I want to play, Helen said finally, her voice firm. I won't let what Megan did destroy my dream. That would be letting her win even from jail. Claire smiled with pride. That's my student. Then let's get to work. You have 3 weeks to be ready. Helen resumed her practice with renewed determination. Her hands, now free from the poison, responded better and better. Music became her therapy, her refuge, her way of processing everything that had happened. Every note of Claire de Lune carried not only melancholic beauty but also pain, recovery, and resistance. Meanwhile, the case against Megan moved forward. Her lawyer tried to build a defense based on emotional distress and depression, but the evidence was overwhelming. The pills found, the lab analysis of Helen's vitamins, the recorded confession in the presence of the family's lawyer. Megan had sealed her own fate. Edward was torn. He loved his wife, or at least he loved the person he thought she was, but he couldn't ignore or forgive what she had done. He initiated divorce proceedings and requested full custody of Isabella, something the teenager fully supported. Isabella, for her part, was in intensive therapy, processing years of maternal manipulation and the trauma of discovering what her mother was capable of. The therapist, an experienced woman named Dr. Franklin, helped the girl understand that she was not responsible for Megan's actions, that she could love her mother and at the same time acknowledge her grave mistakes. In one of the joint family therapy sessions that Edward and Isabella attended, the topic of the piano came up. Isabella, do you still play? The therapist asked. The teenager shook her head. I stopped. I can't anymore. Every time I see the piano, I remember my mother's obsession, how she forced me. What if you tried to reframe the piano? Dr. Franklin suggested. What if, instead of being the symbol of the pressure your mother put on you, it became a symbol of your own choice? You could decide to play when you want, how you want, with no expectations. Or you could decide not to play anymore, and that would be valid too. Isabella considered her words. Maybe someday, but not now. Edward supported his daughter. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, Izzy. Not ever again. 2 weeks before the recital, Helen had an unexpected visitor. It was Mark, Megan's younger brother, who had come from New York specifically to talk to her. Mark was a 35-year-old doctor, married with 2 children. Unlike his sister, he was balanced and compassionate. Mrs. Miller, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but may I speak with you for a few minutes? Helen, initially hesitant, agreed. They sat on the porch, overlooking the well-tended garden. I want to apologize on behalf of my family, Mark began. What my sister did is unforgivable. My parents are devastated. We all are. Megan always had issues. She was always competitive and insecure, but we never imagined it would come to this. Helen listened in silence, letting the young man speak. I visited her in jail yesterday, Mark continued. She's different. I think she's finally understanding the gravity of what she did. I'm not asking you to forgive her. I just wanted you to know that she doesn't represent all of us, and that if there's anything we can do to lessen the suffering she caused, please let us know. Helen felt a wave of emotion. Mark, I appreciate your words, and I don't blame you or your family. Everyone is responsible for their own actions. Megan made choices, and now she has to deal with the consequences. Are you going to play in the recital? I am, Helen answered with conviction. I'm going to play for the dream I've always had. I'm going to play for the 8-year-old girl who fell in love with the piano. And I'm going to play to prove that no one can take from us what truly matters, unless we let them. Mark smiled with respect. You are an incredible woman. Isabella is lucky to have you as her grandmother. After Mark left, Helen felt something shift inside. The anger and hurt she had been carrying began to transform into something different. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an understanding that Megan was a deeply troubled person, that her actions came from a place of pain and inadequacy. The final rehearsals were intense. Claire worked with Helen not only on technique but also on stage presence, on the emotional connection with the music. You're not just playing notes, Helen. You're telling your story. The story of a woman who waited her whole life for this moment and let nothing destroy it. Helen practiced for hours. A day sometimes accompanied by Isabella, who would simply sit in the living room and listen. The music created a bridge between them, a space for shared healing. Edward also found solace in the melodies that emanated from the room. After exhausting days at the office and painful visits to the jail to sort out separation details, he would come home and sit on the stairs, listening to his mother play. The music reminded him that beauty could still exist, even in the midst of destruction. A week before the recital, Teresa organized a small dinner at Helen's house with some old friends. It was an attempt to bring back normalcy, to remind Helen that she had a support network beyond her immediate family. The women, all in their 70s, shared stories of their own lives, their own deferred dreams, their own triumphs. Helen realized she wasn't alone. Each of those women carried invisible scars, silent battles they had fought. You know, Helen, said Gloria, one of the friends, 73 and a former university professor, what you're doing is so much bigger than playing the piano. You're showing that it's never too late to start over. That suffering doesn't have to define who we are. The words stayed with Helen. She was doing more than fulfilling a personal dream. She was becoming a symbol of resistance and resilience, especially for women of her generation who so often had to put their own desires on the back burner. 3 days before the recital, Helen received a letter. It was from Megan, sent from jail. Edward brought it to her hesitantly, unsure if his mother would want to read it. Helen took the envelope and went to her room. She sat in the armchair by the window and opened the letter with slightly trembling hands. The handwriting was Megan's, but the words seemed to come from someone different. Helen. The letter began, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need to say some things, even if it's just to get them off my chest. I envied you, not just for the piano, but for everything. For the way Edward loves you unconditionally. For the natural, easy relationship you have with Isabella. For the peace you seem to have with yourself. I never had that. I always felt inadequate, always needing to prove something. My parents were demanding, never satisfied with anything I did. I carried that into my adult life, desperately trying to be perfect, to do everything right. When you started playing the piano and got all that praise, something inside me broke. It wasn't fair. I had invested years in Isabella, trying to make her everything I couldn't be. And then you show up, start from scratch, and get recognition I never had. The envy consumed me. I know that doesn't justify anything. Nothing justifies what I did. Poisoning you was cruel, calculated, unforgivable. I tried to destroy your dream because I couldn't deal with my own frustration. And in doing so, I destroyed my own life, my marriage, my relationship with my daughter. Now, sitting in this cell, I have plenty of time to think, and I realize the problem was never you. It was always me. My insecurity, my sick need for validation, my inability to feel genuine happiness for others' achievements. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I recognize my mistakes, and I wanted you to play in the recital. Play for you, for your dream, for the little girl who always wanted to make music. Play and be happy, you deserve it. The letter ended without a formal signature. Just the initials M.M. Helen folded the letter and put it in her drawer. She didn't know how she felt about those words. Part of her saw the letter as an attempt at manipulation, to gain sympathy. Another part recognized that perhaps there was genuine remorse there. But regardless of the truth, Helen knew that her healing didn't depend on Megan. It depended on herself. The night before the recital, Helen barely slept. Anxiety was mixed with excitement, fear with determination. She got up before dawn and went to the living room. She sat at the piano and played Clair de Lune one last time before the official performance. The notes flowed smoothly, melancholically, laden with all the emotions she had lived through in recent months. When she finished, she had tears in her eyes, but they were tears of catharsis, of release. Edward came down the stairs and found his mother still sitting at the piano. "Mom, are you ready?" Helen turned to her son and smiled. "I am, Edward. I'm more ready than I've ever been for anything in my life." Edward hugged her tenderly. "I'm so proud of you. I always have been, but now even more so. You've turned something terrible into something beautiful." Helen kissed her son's forehead. "We're going to be okay, Edward. All of us. It may not seem like it now, but we will be." Isabella joined them moments later, still in her pajamas. "Grandma, I'll be in the front row tonight, cheering for you." "I know, sweetie, and that means everything to me." The day was spent in preparation. Helen chose an elegant navy blue dress she had bought especially for the occasion. She did her nails, styled her hair in a low, discreet bun. When she looked in the mirror, she saw not just a 72-year-old woman about to realize a dream, but a survivor, a warrior. At 5 in the afternoon, it was time to go to Jordan Hall. Edward drove with Helen in the passenger seat and Isabella in the back. The concert hall was downtown, a historic building with imposing architecture. When they arrived, Helen's heart began to race. Other performers were already there, all adults of various ages who, like her, had decided to pursue musical dreams later in life. Claire greeted everyone with warm hugs, her enthusiasm contagious. "Helen, dear, you look beautiful," Claire said. "And are you calm?" "Surprisingly, yes," Helen replied. "I think I've been through worse things recently. Playing the piano doesn't seem so scary in comparison." Claire laughed. "That's the right perspective. Now come on, let's do a quick warm-up backstage." Half an hour before the recital began, the hall started to fill up. Edward and Isabella sat in the front row as promised. Teresa was there with her other friends. Even Mark, Megan's brother, showed up, sitting discreetly in the back rows. Jordan Hall was packed when the lights went down. A respectful silence fell over the audience of nearly 300 people. Claire took the stage to open the recital, explaining the purpose of the annual event that celebrated adults who had decided to pursue musical dreams regardless of age. "Tonight," Claire began in an emotional voice, "we will witness courage, the courage to start late, the courage to be imperfect, the courage to be vulnerable and share art. Every person who will take this stage has a unique story, and every note they play will be a personal victory." The audience applauded warmly. Edward squeezed Isabella's hand, both knowing that when it was Helen's turn, they would be witnessing much more than a musical performance. They would be seeing a declaration of resistance. The first performers took the stage one by one. An 80-year-old man played a Chopin waltz with trembling but determined fingers. A 50-year-old woman, a corporate executive, presented a contemporary piece she had composed herself. A retired couple played a Mozart sonata for hands, their years of partnership evident in their perfect synchronization. Each performance was met with enthusiastic applause. There was no judgment there, only celebration. It was a safe space where technical perfection mattered less than emotional authenticity. Finally, After the 10th performance, Claire returned to the stage and made the announcement Edward and Isabella had been waiting for. Our next performer is Helen Miller. At 72, Helen began her piano lessons just 3 years ago. She will be playing Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy. Helen rose from backstage, her legs trembling slightly. Claire met her in the wings and held her hands. "You've got this. Breathe. Connect with the music. The rest will come naturally." Helen nodded and walked onto the stage. The grand piano waited in the center, illuminated by a soft spotlight. The audience was a dark mass of silhouettes, faces indistinguishable in the dim light. But Helen knew Edward and Isabella were there, and that was enough. She sat at the piano bench, adjusted her posture and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, everything disappeared. There was no audience, no concert hall, no weight of the past few months. There was only her and the instrument, ready to tell a story through music. The first notes of Clair de Lune echoed through the hall, soft, delicate like raindrops falling on a tranquil lake. Helen closed her eyes and let herself go. Her fingers moved across the keys with a lightness she had never experienced before. She wasn't thinking about technique, about posture, about anything Claire had taught her. She was simply feeling. The music flowed from her, as if it had always been there, waiting to be released. Each note carried memories. The 8-year-old girl watching that performance in the church. The young teacher who kept her dreams silent. The widow who finally had time for herself. The dedicated student who found joy. In every mastered scale. The victim of poisoning who fought to keep her dream alive. The survivor who decided not to be broken. Tears streamed down Helen's face as she played, but she didn't stop. The music was catharsis. It was healing. It was liberation. It was everything she had held inside for 72 years finally finding expression. In the audience, Edward was crying openly. Isabella held his arm, her own eyes misty. Teresa and Helen's other friends were moved. Even people who didn't know Helen, who didn't know her story, felt something profound in the music she played. There was a transcendent quality to that performance, something that went beyond the notes on the page. Claire, watching from backstage, smiled through her tears. In 40 years of teaching piano, she had seen hundreds of performances, but few had touched her as deeply as this one. Helen wasn't just playing well, she was playing the truth. The piece reached its emotional climax. The notes became more intense, more urgent, like waves building before crashing on the shore. Helen was completely immersed, her body moving subtly with the music. Every fiber of her being dedicated to that moment. And then, gradually, the intensity began to fade. The notes returned to their initial softness, like a storm passing and calm returning. The final chords floated through the hall, delicate as butterfly wings, until the last note dissipated into silence. Helen kept her hands on the keys for a few more seconds, her eyes still closed, savoring the moment. She had done it. After a lifetime of waiting, after months of suffering and struggle, she had finally realized her dream. She opened her eyes, slowly. For an instant that felt like an eternity, the hall remained in absolute silence. Helen felt a moment of panic. Had she played that badly? Were people embarrassed? And then, like a breaking wave, the audience erupted in applause. It wasn't just polite, appreciative applause. It was a thunderous, emotional standing ovation. People were shouting, "Bravo!" whistling, stomping their feet. The entire hall was on its feet, celebrating not just a musical performance, but a story of overcoming and courage. Helen rose from the piano, her legs nearly giving out. She gave a trembling bow, the tears now flowing freely. She looked to the front row and saw Edward and Isabella applauding fervently, their faces beaming with pride and love. Claire came onto the stage and hugged Helen for a long time. The audience kept applauding. When the applause finally began to die down, Claire took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "we have just witnessed something very special. Helen didn't just play the piano tonight. She showed us what it means to never give up on a dream. She reminded us that we are stronger than we think, that obstacles, no matter how great, do not have to define us. Helen, thank you for sharing your music and your soul with us." The audience applauded again. Helen, still on stage, looked out at all those people and felt something open up in her chest. It wasn't just personal fulfillment. It was human connection. It was the confirmation that her journey, her suffering, her victory, meant something beyond herself. When she finally left the stage, she was met with warm hugs from the other performers. Everyone wanted to congratulate her, to share how her performance had touched them. Helen thanked them for every word, every gesture, feeling enveloped in a wave of love and support. After the recital, there was a small reception in the lobby. Edward and Isabella found Helen immediately. Edward hugged his mother so tightly he almost knocked her over. "Mum, you were incredible. Perfect. I have no words." Isabella hugged her grandmother next. "Grandma, I will never forget this. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You taught me that it's worth fighting for our dreams." Helen kissed her granddaughter's forehead. "And you, my dear, will discover your own dreams. And when you do, I'll be here to support you with no pressure, no expectations, just love." Teresa approached with the other friends, all talking at once about how moving the performance was, how Helen was an inspiration. People Helen didn't know came up to greet her, some sharing their own stories of deferred dreams, others simply thanking her for letting them see her play. In a quieter corner of the lobby, Mark, Megan's brother, waited his turn. When he finally got to speak with Helen, his words were simple but sincere. "Mrs. Miller, it was an honor to be here tonight. You turned pain into beauty. That's what the best artists do." Helen shook the young man's hand. "Thank you for coming, Mark, and tell your sister, if you wish, that I played, that I lived my dream, and that I hold out hope that she one day will also find peace." Mark nodded, moved, and quietly withdrew. The reception lasted for over an hour. When they finally left and got back to the car, Helen was exhausted but radiant. On the way home, she looked out the window at the illuminated city of Boston and reflected on everything she had been through in the last few months. It had been a brutal journey, yes. She had faced betrayal, poisoning, the near destruction of her dream. But she had also discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. She had deepened her relationship with her son and granddaughter. She had become a symbol of resistance, not just for herself, but for everyone who knew her. In the days following the recital, Helen received dozens of messages from people who had been there or had heard about the performance. Some were from acquaintances, others from complete strangers. All of them shared how her story had inspired them to pursue their own forgotten dreams. One message in particular touched Helen deeply. It was from a 60-year-old woman who wrote, "Mrs. Miller, I watched your performance. For 30 years I've had a guitar in my closet, dreaming of learning to play. I never had the courage to start. Today, inspired by you, I signed up for music lessons. Thank you for showing me it's never too late." Helen replied to every message with warmth, aware that her journey had become bigger than herself. The case against Megan continued its legal course. 3 months after the recital, the trial took place. The jury heard all the evidence, the testimonies, the arguments from both sides. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity due to a mental disorder, but the experts concluded that Megan knew exactly what she was doing when she poisoned her mother-in-law. Helen was called to testify. She sat on the witness stand and answered every question with honesty and dignity. When the prosecutor asked how the poisoning had affected her, she said, "It almost destroyed my dream. It almost took away my joy in making music. But I learned that we are defined not by what happens to us, but by how we respond to what happens to us. And I chose to respond with resistance." When it was the defense's turn to question Helen, Megan's lawyer asked, "Can you forgive my client?" Helen thought for a long moment. "Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. Today I can say that I don't hold any hatred for Megan. I understand that she acted from a place of deep pain, but complete forgiveness, maybe one day. Not yet." Megan was present in the courtroom, dressed in simple clothes, her face without makeup, looking years older than she was. When she looked at Helen, there was something in her eyes that Helen interpreted as genuine remorse. But some actions carry consequences that go beyond remorse. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned with the verdict, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Megan was found guilty of felony poisoning. The judge, in delivering the sentence, was clear and forceful. "Mrs. Miller," the judge said, "your actions were calculated, cruel, and motivated by petty feelings. You poisoned a vulnerable person in your own family, someone who trusted you. You tried to destroy an elderly woman's dream out of pure envy. This court cannot tolerate such acts. I sentence you to 4 years in state prison, in addition to restitution. To the victim for the damages caused." Edward, sitting in the courtroom audience, buried his face in his hands. Isabella cried silently. Helen remained serene, knowing that justice had been served, even if it brought no satisfaction, only closure. Megan was taken back to prison. Edward's divorce was finalized weeks later. He took full custody of Isabella and slowly began to rebuild his life. Therapy helped him process the betrayal, understand the signs he had ignored, and forgive himself for his blindness. Isabella blossomed in the following months. Free from her mother's pressure, she discovered new interests. She started writing, poetry, something she had always wanted to do but never had the courage. Her first collection of poems, written about resilience and overcoming, was dedicated to her grandmother. Helen continued her piano lessons with Claire. She participated in 2 more recitals the following year, each time playing with more confidence and depth. But beyond that, she started a volunteer project. Once a week, she went to a nursing home in Boston and played the piano for the elderly residents. Many of them, like her, had postponed dreams their whole lives. Helen inspired them to never give up, to find joy, even in difficult circumstances. A year after the recital that changed her life, Helen was sitting in her living room, playing casually, when Isabella came in with some news. "Grandma, you're not going to believe this. Remember that woman who messaged you after your recital? The one who started playing guitar because of you?" "I do," Helen said, stopping her playing. She started a group online for adults who are learning instruments later in life. The group already has over 1,000 members. And she wants to invite you to speak to the group, to share your story. Helen smiled. "How wonderful! Of course, I'll speak to them." And so, without planning it, Helen became an informal mentor to dozens of people seeking the courage to pursue postponed dreams. Her talks in the online group were always full of practical wisdom and genuine empathy. She didn't romanticize the journey, didn't pretend it was easy, but she showed that it was possible. Edward, watching his mother from a distance, marveled at her transformation. "Mom," he said on a quiet Sunday, "you know you're an inspiration to a lot of people, don't you?" Helen shook her head modestly. "I just did what I had to do. I kept fighting." "No," Edward insisted. "You did much more than that. You transformed your pain into something that helps other people. That's extraordinary." Helen hugged her son. "Edward, I learned that suffering can either destroy us or transform us. It depends on the choices we make. I chose to be transformed. And you did too. Look how you've grown, how you're being a better father to Isabella, how you're allowing yourself to feel and to heal." Edward smiled. "I learned from the best." 2 years after the events that shook the Miller family, Helen was giving a talk at a local university on art, overcoming adversity and active aging. The room was packed with people of all ages. At the end, a young woman in her 20s raised her hand. "Mrs. Miller, if you could go back in time, would you have started playing the piano earlier?" Helen thought for a moment. "It's tempting to say yes, to think of all the years I could have dedicated to music. But you know, I wouldn't change a thing, because it was precisely the waiting, precisely having lived a whole life before I started, that gave my music its depth. Every note I play now carries 72 years of experience, of joy, of pain, of love. That's priceless." The room applauded. The young woman smiled, satisfied with the answer. After the talk, on her way home, Helen reflected on that question. It was true. She wouldn't change a thing, not even the suffering caused by Megan, because everything, absolutely everything, had contributed to who she had become, and she liked who she was now. Megan was serving her sentence. Isabella visited her occasionally, maintaining limited contact. Megan was in intensive psychiatric treatment in prison and, according to reports, was making real progress in understanding and working through her issues. Whether there would be a family reconciliation in the future, no one knew. But the door was not completely closed. Helen, for her part, had found peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from an absence of problems, but the deep peace that comes from having faced the worst and survived, from having her dream nearly destroyed and realizing it anyway, from discovering a strength she never knew she possessed. 3 years after that memorable recital, on a spring morning exactly like the one where it all began, Helen woke up and went to the living room. She sat at the piano and simply looked at the instrument for a long moment. That magnificent grand piano that Edward had given her, which had been the stage for so much drama and so much beauty. She placed her hands on the keys, now completely healed, stronger and more skilled than ever, and she began to play. Not Claire de Lune this time, but a new piece Claire had taught her. The notes filled the house, gently waking Edward and Isabella. From upstairs they heard the music and smiled. That sound was the soundtrack to their mornings now, the sound of resilience, of overcoming, of love that persists despite everything. Isabella came down and sat on the couch, watching her grandmother play. "Grandma?" she asked when Helen finished the piece. "Are you happy?" Helen turned to her granddaughter, her face illuminated by the morning light streaming through the windows. "I am, dear, genuinely happy. Not because everything is perfect, but because I've learned that happiness doesn't come from perfect circumstances. It comes from within, from our ability to find beauty even in the midst of hardship, to keep dreaming even when all seems lost." Isabella hugged her grandmother. "When I grow up, I want to be like you." Helen laughed softly. "No, my child, you'll be better. You'll be yourself, with your own story, your own dreams, your own strength, and I'll be here to watch you shine." And so, in that house in Boston, in the Beacon Hill neighborhood, life went on. Marked by scars, yes, but also by healing, by losses, but also by discoveries, by suffering, but also by profound joy. Helen continued to play the piano, give talks and inspire people. Edward rebuilt his life, learning to trust again, to love more consciously. Isabella flourished in her adolescence and then into adulthood, always carrying the lessons of resilience she had learned from her grandmother. And the piano, that magnificent instrument that was the catalyst for so much pain and so much beauty, continued to sound through the house. Each note a reminder that we are capable of so much more than we imagine. Each chord a celebration of human strength. Each melody a testament that dreams, no matter how late, are always worth pursuing. Because in the end, we are not defined by what happens to us. We are defined by how we choose to respond. And Helen Miller, that 72-year-old woman who almost had her dream destroyed, chose to respond with music, with courage, with an absolute refusal to be broken. And that choice made all the difference. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Helen's story has touched your heart. If you were moved by this incredible woman's journey of overcoming, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this story resonated with you the most. Every day we bring you intense narratives, like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us that we are stronger than we imagine. We'll see you in the next episode.